Well, we are at Ardnamurchan Point, the most westerly point in the British mainland, and the fourth of the compass points that I was cycling between. So behind me you can see the islands of Muck and Rum and Egg and Skye, and behind the camera you can see Mull.
And how far have you come?
I have to add it all up. The original route was 2,500, but I think I took some shortcuts, but let's call it 2,500.
And
plus
so
or minus.
We're at the end.
Yep.
And how do you feel?
Surprisingly good. Very proud, very happy that we've raised so much money. Happy that we've got a conversation going on about bowel cancer. Happy that happy I'm going to get a good night's sleep tonight as well. And happy that I might be able to put on some cotton clothing instead of lycra.
And obviously you visited the cemetery on the way. Can you just talk a bit about the significance of that?
Simple, my father's buried there, so it's just down the road, and he was one of the big reasons for doing this. So it was just paying a few respects, and let's leave it at that.
And just to recap, leading on from that, the whole point of the mission.
So the point about this is to raise 100,000 for Fortitude to fund a full-time research fellow in memory of Tom Smith, the great rugby player, so that we can research the genetics of hereditary bowel cancer and just make a difference to this disease, and at the same time as well raise awareness of the disease as well, so that people know what the symptoms are and that they'll identify them and do something about it.
And the money raised is at what point?
Money raised, I think, we're pretty much around the 100,000 right now. I'm just looking there. We're not far off it with gift aid and everything included, and there'll be more to come in, absolutely. So the fundraising's just been phenomenal. The kindness of people has just been phenomenal. Our sponsors, you can see them here. We've got Renuco, but really Verisure. Where's Verisure? There we go. Verisure, Fibrous, Renuco, Famous Grouse. Thank you very much. Have just been fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
And having completed it, any kind of reflections, thoughts, impressions?
It's amazing how much you can do if you just keep going. May sound strange, but if you've got if you've got a real compelling purpose, which in this case, obviously I have, then you'll get through all the tough times, and it will give you the motivation to keep going. I mean, this started out in lockdown as an idea that I had, and I shared it with a couple of people, and then I shared it with a couple more, and before you know it, it's out there and it becomes a commitment, and then before you know it, you're on national radio and national TV, and there's no way back. So if things get tough or if circumstances change, they've changed. Get on with it. So you can't ride during the day, fine, ride during the night. You just have to get on with it, and I think that's one of the big learnings. I think another learning is just simple acts of human kindness make a massive difference. People at the side of the road saying, we're tracking you, good luck, here's a chocolate bar or some water. I mean, those just make a massive difference to your motivation. So, I think just the act of being kind and being thoughtful makes a massive difference to the people on the receiving end of that kindness.
And out of interest, when you're cycling along, what are you thinking?
Now we're staying into Alan Partridge territory. For much of this ride, I was having to calculate options and alternatives because I was having to catch up so much time. I lost half a day, and half a day when you've only got 7 days is a lot of time. So I was having to calculate, how do I catch up that time? Where do I want to get to tonight? How far will I have to cycle? Is it worth me, for instance, cycling to Brora, or do I just stay in Inverness and add 60 miles on tomorrow night, or do I cycle to Brora and perhaps only get 1 or 2 hours sleep? So I'm constantly just readjusting and checking the plan. That's one of the big things you're doing, absolutely.
Favourite part of the UK?
I actually really enjoyed seeing how Britain fits together, because often we do it by train or by car, and you go up a motorway and you don't see the patchwork and how it's how it's put together. So thinking back to Devon and Cornwall, the hills of Devon and Cornwall, which are pretty tough. And then you go through the flat middle where you have Oxford, Cambridge, Swindon, these type of places, into East Anglia, Norfolk and Suffolk, again very, very different, coastal towns that have seen better days. Excuse me. Back up through Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, the agriculture there quite phenomenal. Then into Yorkshire. Yorkshire's just a huge county. It just goes on and on and on. And then at every turn you would just come across things that were quintessentially English. Cricket matches, little villages with pubs and churches. Then up into County Durham, briefly into Northumberland, and then over the border into Scotland. So you just see how these things all fit together. I knew Scotland, I knew the roads in Scotland, but it was lovely seeing how England fits together. Metheringham was fantastic, right? You look at who's ever heard of Metheringham. I'll never forget Metheringham now. The place where I had to stop because it was just so hot. Metheringham in Lincolnshire. Who knows about it? They're fantastic. So I don't think there were any least favourite places. Even in places that didn't look ostensibly very wealthy or welcoming, everyone was just very, very kind.
When was your dark night of the soul? When was the time that it all seemed most bleak?
The toughest time was the 60 miles from Inverness to Brora on day 5, because I knew I had to play catch up, and I'd done a long ride I rode from Lincoln to Edinburgh, which I didn't realise at the time, but that's 275 miles, and I did that in a day, which is massive. And then the next day I really wanted to get to Brora, because the day after that I wanted to finish in Inverness, and I knew that if I got to Brora I could finish in Inverness, but if I didn't get to Brora I would just have to do those miles the next day. And I did 60 miles from Inverness to Brora, and it was dark and it was cold and I was literally falling asleep on the bike, and I had to stop and slap myself and shout and jump up and down and this type of thing. I was just anything I could do. I stopped about a mile short of Brora and spent about 10 minutes just shouting at myself to get going and wake up, and that was really tough. And then when I woke up the next morning in Brora, I woke up but I just could not move. I couldn't lift myself. I had to roll out of bed, which was a bit embarrassing because I literally rolled out of bed and fell on the floor. But that was tough. But then once the legs get going, you're back on it again.
And highlight the highest apex of the journey?
The highlights of the journey, I think the last 50 miles, when we crossed the Corn Ferry onto the Ardnamurchan Peninsula. Those are roads I know like the back of my hand, and they were some of the toughest roads actually I cycled. But I knew that the end was in sight. I knew the family was there, and every pedal was just taking me closer to that. And they're such beautiful roads that they just flew by. It was the most enjoyable 50 miles. You ponder on what you've learnt when you're doing the ride, and people talk about heroic and extraordinary. It never felt that way to me at all. It felt, it may sound strange, it felt ordinary, because it didn't just happen. It wasn't that I woke up one morning and thought I'm going to cycle all of these thousands of kilometres. I've been training and working hard at this for almost a year. Planning, physical training, and it was tough, but it was doable, and it wasn't something that I felt was so out of my comfort zone, which may sound very, very strange, but the only reason it felt that way was because of all the work that had gone before. So I think that may sound a bit of a garbled explanation, but that was one thing. I think I learned that if you've got commitments to people and you go public with them, you'll make it happen. There's no way back. When you're on national TV and national radio and you've said you're going to cycle this in 7 days, then you've made a commitment. You better go and do it. I come back to the kindness of people. just little acts of kindness, people turning up in the middle of the night, waving and wishing you good luck. I mean, those are just huge, absolutely huge, and they cost nothing, but the impact that they have is enormous. I also learned, and I know the numbers, but I learned how many people are impacted by bowel cancer. So whenever I stopped and spoke to people and they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm doing this for bowel cancer." And I can guarantee you, 1 in 3 said, "I have a family member, a friend who's got or is suffering from bowel cancer." So the prevalence and the stories that people had and the encouragement to make this public and to talk about it in public is absolutely massive. And I think that that's a change. Obviously Deborah James and Bowel Babe has made that change as well, but that's a huge step forward. So that's another thing that really struck me about the whole trip. What's next? Nothing that involves a stopwatch, I can tell you. If I'm going to cycle that far again, I'm going to be going pub to pub to pub and taking my time and enjoying the scenery. Yeah.